They say you have to be ruthless to get ahead in this world, that kindness is a weakness the powerful can't afford. But what if that's the biggest lie we've ever been told? What if the most powerful force for change isn't a billion-dollar deal, but a single selfless gesture from someone with nothing to give? This is a story that challenges everything we think we know about success and compassion. A story that ignites when a struggling waitress paid for a stranger's meal, completely unaware that he was a secret millionaire watching her every move. The truth is, we all wear masks. We put on a brave face for the world, hiding our private struggles behind a professional smile, or concealing our deep loneliness behind a wall of wealth and success. We pretend we're okay when we're falling apart, and we build identities that often have little to do with who we truly are on the inside. This story is about what happens when those masks are suddenly stripped away, revealing the raw, vulnerable hearts of two people living secret lives. On one side, we have Alexandra Romero, a young woman working tirelessly at a dead-end diner, juggling bills and worries with a grace that nobody sees. She's the kind of person who gives even when she has nothing left, fighting her own battles in silence. On the other side is Scott Wood, a lonely, disillusioned millionaire who has everything he could ever want, except for one thing: a genuine human connection. He hides his wealth, walking the city as a stranger, desperately searching for proof that goodness still exists in the world. And then, one rainy afternoon, their two worlds collide over a simple plate of food. A moment of pure, unexpected compassion from Alexandra becomes the catalyst for a chain of events so emotional, so filled with surprise and heart-aching moments, that it will challenge everything they both believe about trust, love, and the true meaning of worth. You're about to witness a love story where the greatest plot twist isn't about the money, but about the incredible power of seeing the value in someone when no one else does. Before we dive into this incredible journey of overcoming and redemption, I want to feel the amazing energy of our community. Please, take a moment to comment below and let us know what beautiful city or town you're watching from right now, so we know how far our story has reached. And if you believe that kindness is a superpower, do us a favor and hit that like button. Be sure to follow the channel so you never miss another story. And share this video with one person you know who needs a reminder that good things still happen in this world. Well, you know, some stories don't start with a bang, but with a whisper, a quiet little moment that destiny grabs onto with both hands. It's funny how a simple act of kindness can set off a chain reaction nobody sees coming. In a Grace Spoon diner, where the smell of coffee and regret hangs thick in the air, we find our struggling waitress, Alexandra Romero. She moved through the tables not just as an employee, but as a silent observer of life's little dramas, carrying the weight of her own battles on her shoulders while serving up smiles she couldn't always afford to feel. On this particular Tuesday, a stranger sat in her section, a man who looked like the world had chewed him up and spit him out. He nursed a single cup of coffee for an hour, his eyes lost in the rain streaming down the window pane. There was a profound sadness about him, a loneliness that Alexandra recognized because she felt it in her own bones. This wasn't just another customer, this was a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler on the hard road of life, and she felt an odd, unspoken connection to this quiet man. When the time came to pay, the man's face fell. He fumbled through his pockets, a quiet panic growing in his eyes, a scene of being humiliated that Alexandra had witnessed far too many times. It was a heart-aching and painful moment, a small defeat that felt monumental under the diner's fluorescent lights. She knew that feeling all too well, the sting of not having enough, and in that instant, he wasn't a stranger anymore. He was a mirror, reflecting back a struggle she intimately understood. Without a second thought, she stepped in. With a soft smile, she leaned in and whispered that his meal was on the house, a little surprise from the kitchen. It wasn't true, of course. The money came from her own pocket, from the tip she desperately needed to make rent. It was a gesture that defied logic, a small act of rebellion against a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. This was her secret weapon against the darkness, an unwavering, almost reckless kindness. The stranger, who well come to know as Scott Wood, looked at her, truly looked at her, with an intensity that took her by surprise. It wasn't pity or even just gratitude in his eyes, it was something deeper, something akin to awe. He was a millionaire, a man used to grand gestures and calculated transactions, yet this small, genuine offering from a struggling waitress struck a chord deep within his soul. He saw a purity he thought no longer existed in the world. He simply nodded, left a quiet thank you, and walked out into the rain, leaving Alexandra to wonder about the sadied man. She had no idea she had just served the city's most elusive secret. Millionaire. She believed she had just helped someone in need, never suspecting that her simple act of compassion was the first thread in a love story that would challenge everything both she and Scott thought they knew about wealth, worth, and the true meaning of connection. You see, Alexandra Romero's life was a masterclass in the art of juggling. Every day was a delicate balancing act of bills stacked high on her small kitchen table, and the constant, quiet hum of worry for her family. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a warrior in a floral apron, fighting silent battles with a grace that nobody ever saw. The diner wasn't just a job, it was her entire world, a stage where she performed the role of someone who had it all together, even when her own life was threatening to fall apart. Her smile, a genuine beacon of light for the weary customers she served, was her armor. It shielded the world from the exhaustion that settled deep in her bones after every double shift. It was a currency she traded in, hoping to earn enough to keep the lights on for one more month. This constant state of struggling could make a person bitter, could harden the heart into a stone. But for Alexandra, it did the opposite. It carved out a space for a radical kind of empathy, a deep understanding of human frailty. She saw the stories in people's eyes: lonely widower who came for the company as much as the coffee, the young student stressing over exams, and in each of them she saw a piece of herself. Her kindness wasn't a strategy, it was an instinct, a reflex she couldn't turn off. She'd slip an extra cookie onto a child's plate, or lend a listening ear to a heartbroken regular, small gestures that meant the world. It was this compassion that kept her own spirit from breaking under the pressure. This wasn't a grand, performative charity. It was a quiet, consistent outpouring of a good heart, a daily practice of overcoming her own hardships by easing the burdens of others. It's a funny thing about compassion: the more you give it away, the more it seems to fill you up. And Alexandra, despite having so little in a material sense, was overflowing with a richness that most people, especially the wealthy, spend their whole lives searching for but never find. She moved through her days with a tireless spirit, fueled by a fierce love for the people in her life and a stubborn refusal to give up. Her world was small, confined to the four walls of the diner and her tiny apartment, but her heart was as vast as the sky. She wasn't waiting for a hero or a miracle. She was simply trying to be a small source of light in a world that often felt dim, a testament to the power of a compassionate soul. What she didn't know was that this quiet, unassuming strength hadn't gone unnoticed. The very essence of her character, forged in the fires of her daily struggles, had captivated a man who could give her everything she ever needed. But he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that giving her things would never be enough. He had to understand the source of her incredible spirit, the secret behind her unwavering grace. Now let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this story, at the world of Scott Wood. On paper, he was the man who had everything a bona fide millionaire, with an empire at his fingertips and a life that looked like a glossy magazine cover. But beneath the surface, he was drowning in a sea of superficiality. His days were a blur of sterile boardrooms, fake smiles at lavish parties, and conversations that were all business and no heart. He was rich in fortune but bankrupt in spirit. Loneliness was his closest companion, a shadow that followed him through his marble-floored mansion. He was surrounded by people who wanted something from him, but he couldn't remember the last time. Someone wanted something for him. To escape this gilded cage, he developed a secret ritual. He would shed his designer suits like a second skin, put on the clothes of a common man-worn jeans, a faded shirt, and walk invisible among the people of the city he supposedly owned. He wasn't just slumming it for fun. He was on a desperate search for something. Anything real. He wanted to find a moment of genuine human connection, a conversation that wasn't a transaction, a smile that wasn't a negotiation. He became a stranger. In his own city, an anonymous observer searching for a sign that the world hadn't completely lost its soul. It was during one of these excursions that destiny, with a wink and a nod, guided him into Alexandra's diner. Her act of kindness wasn't just a nice gesture to him, it was a lighthouse in the fog of his disillusionment. It was so pure, so unexpected, that it felt like a jolt to his system. This struggling waitress, who had every reason to be cynical, had shown him more humanity in 5 minutes than had experienced in the last 5 years. It was a heart-aching revelation that left him reeling, questioning the very foundation of his life. He walked away from the diner that day, a changed man, the taste of cheap coffee and expensive kindness lingering on his tongue. The world suddenly looked different, sharper. He had spent years building an empire of glass and steel, but this woman, Alexandra Romero, had shown him the value of a different kind of wealth, kind that resides in the heart. He felt a powerful, magnetic pull back to that little diner, back to her. But he couldn't just walk back in as a millionaire. That would ruin everything. It would taint the purity of their first encounter and make him just another rich man trying to buy his way into someone's life. No, he had to see if her character was truly as golden as it seemed. And so a plan began to form in his mind, a secret test designed to reveal the true nature of the woman who had, in a single moment, captured his entire world. So Scott Wood, the secret millionaire, returned to the diner the very next day, but he didn't go inside. He sat in a nondescript car across the street, watching, a man on a mission. He felt a little crazy, a little obsessed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of a life-altering discovery. He needed to know more about the waitress who paid for a stranger's meal. He had to know if her kindness was a fluke or a fundamental part of who she was. He waited until the end of her shift, when the diner was quiet and she was wiping down the last of the tables, her movements weary but methodical. Then he walked in, still in his disguise, and took a seat in the same booth as before. He ordered a simple piece of pie and a coffee, and when she served him, he looked for any sign of recognition. There was none. To her, he was just another customer, another tired soul at the end of a long day. He ate his pie slowly, making small talk with her, asking about her day. And just as before, she treated him with that same genuine warmth, that same quiet respect. She didn't rush him, even though she was clearly exhausted and ready to go home. This simple consistency, this unwavering decency, was chipping away at the thick walls he had built around his heart. This woman was the real deal, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Then came the moment of the test. When he went to pay at the counter, he pulled out a crumpled wad of cash. As he paid for his small bill, he accidentally let a much larger bill, a very, very large one, fall from the wad and land unseen under the counter's ledge. It was a ridiculously large tip, a sum of money that would be life-changing for someone struggling like her. It was a deliberate, calculated move, a surprise designed to lay a trap for her integrity. He watched her through the reflection in the window as he walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. What would she do? The world he came from, the one of cutthroat deals and rampant greed, told him she would pocket the money without a second thought. Anyone would, why wouldn't she? It was a fortune, found by chance with no one the wiser. It was the ultimate test of character, a silent question hanging in the air. He drove away feeling a strange mix of hope and dread. He was deeply moved by her selfless act from the day before, but he had to know for sure. This wasn't just about a tip, it was about everything. It was about proving to himself that true goodness still existed, that there was something more to life than the cynical game he had been playing. He had left the bait, and now all he could do was wait and see if she would take it. Later that night, as Alexandra was sweeping the floor, her broom knocked against the bill Scott had left behind. She bent down, thinking it was probably a stray dollar, and her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't $1, it was an amount of money so large it didn't seem real. For a moment, she just stared at it, her mind racing. This was more than her rent for several months. It was a ticket out of the immediate, crushing pressure that defined her life. The first thought that flashed through her mind was temptation. A powerful, seductive whisper. Think of what you could do with this. Pay off your debts. Help your family. Breathe. For one fleeting second, the struggling waitress considered the possibility. No one would ever know. It was a finder's keeper's world, wasn't it? The universe finally throwing her a bone after years of hard knocks. This could be the surprise that changed everything for her. But then, almost as quickly as the thought appeared, it was replaced by another image, the face of the sated stranger. She remembered the worn-out jacket, the haunted look in his eyes, the quiet shame when he couldn't pay his bill. She didn't see a clumsy man who dropped his money. She saw a person who likely needed this cash far more desperately than she did. She imagined this was all he had in the world, a secret stash had saved, and the thought of keeping it felt like stealing. Her integrity, that deep-seated kindness that was the very core of her being, kicked in with a vengeance. Keeping the money was never really an option. It felt wrong, fundamentally wrong. Believing the tip was a huge and terrible mistake, she knew what she had to do. This wasn't her money. Her path wasn't the easy one, but it was the only one she could live with. Her immediate challenge shifted from paying her bills to a new, more urgent mission. She carefully folded the bill and placed it in a separate, safe pocket in her wallet, distinct from her own meager earnings. It felt sacred, like something she was holding in trust for someone else. Her tiredness vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and determination. She was no longer just a waitress finishing her shift. She was a woman on a quest for justice, a quest to return what was lost to its rightful owner. The next morning, she woke with a singular purpose. She would find that stranger. She didn't know his name or where he lived, but she had a clear memory of his face. She would ask around, retrace his steps, do whatever it took to return the money to the person she believed needed it more. It was a monumental task, a search for a ghost in a city of millions, but Alexandra Romero was never one to back down from a challenge, especially when her own conscience was at stake. And so, Alexandra's quest began. She spent her precious hours, before and after her shifts, walking the streets around the diner, showing a crudely sketched drawing of the stranger to street vendors and shopkeepers. "Have you seen this man?" Shed asked, her voice filled with a hopeful urgency. Most people just shook their heads, too busy with their own lives to pay attention to a face in the crowd. But she pressed on, fueled by a relentless sense of duty. What she didn't know was that she was being watched. From a distance, Scott Wood observed her every move. He had his security team discreetly tracking her, reporting back on her efforts. He saw her going into pawn shops and community centers, places she thought a man down on his luck might frequent. Every rejection she faced, every door that closed in her face, was a testament to her incredible character. He was witnessing an act of pure, unadulterated integrity. He sat in his penthouse office, looking at surveillance photos of this struggling waitress on her impossible mission, and a powerful emotional wave washed over him. In his world, people would stab each other in the back for a fraction of the amount she was trying to return. He knew people who managed billion-dollar hedge funds who had less integrity than this woman. He was becoming increasingly captivated by her, not just for her beauty or her warmth, but for the sheer strength of her moral compass. This secret observation felt both invasive and necessary. It was a window into her soul, and what he saw there was breathtaking. He saw her buy a coffee for a homeless man with her own tip money, even as she was on a quest to return a fortune. He saw her help an elderly woman carry her groceries up a flight of stairs. Her kindness wasn't a performance for him or anyone else, it was simply who she was, woven into the fabric of her being. Each day that passed, his fascination grew into a deep, profound respect. He was falling for her, not for a version of her, but for the real, authentic person she was when she thought no one was watching. This secret millionaire, who could have any woman he wanted, found himself completely enthralled by a waitress who possessed a wealth he couldn't buy, a pure and honest heart. Her honest efforts were a stark contrast to the greedy world he knew. Finally, he couldn't stand to watch from the sidelines any longer. The test was over, and she had passed with colors so flying he couldn't have imagined them. He knew he had to talk to her again, not as a test subject, but as a man who was genuinely, deeply interested in getting to know her. The time for secrets and surveillance was over. It was time to return to the diner and let destiny take its course, face to face. With his heart feeling like it was doing acrobatics in his chest, Scott walked back into the diner. He chose a slow afternoon when the lunch rush was over and the place had a sleepy, comfortable feel. He was still in his disguise, the simple clothes that had now become a strange sort of comfort to him, a shield against his other life. He slid into a booth, his eyes immediately finding Alexandra as she refilled salt shakers, a small focused frown on her face. When she came to his table, her eyes lit up with a flicker of recognition. "I've been looking for you," she exclaimed, a wave of relief washing over her face. Before he could even speak, she was pulling the carefully folded bill from her apron. "Pocket, you dropped this the other night. I think you must have made a mistake. I've been so worried, I wanted to make sure you got it back." She held the money out to him, her gesture simple and direct. Scott was for a moment speechless. He had expected her to have the money, but to see the pure, unadulterated relief on her face at being able to return, it was a heart-aching blow. He gently pushed her hand back. "It wasn't a mistake," he said softly. "It was a tip for your kindness." Alexandra looked at him, completely baffled. No one tipped that much. It didn't make any sense. But he insisted, and a comfortable, easy conversation began to flow between them. She finally, reluctantly, put the money away, though she still seemed unconvinced. But the initial mission was over, and now they were just two people talking. He asked about her life, and she spoke of her family, her dreams of one day opening a small bakery, her struggles. She spoke with a vulnerability and openness that was utterly disarming. And in a surprise to herself, she treated this stranger with a genuine warmth and respect, as if they were old friends. She didn't pry into his life, but she listened with an intensity that made him feel seen and heard for the first time in years. To her, he wasn't a secret millionaire, he was a kind, sated man who seemed to carry the world on his shoulders. She found herself wanting to make him smile, to lift some of that invisible weight. A fragile, beautiful connection was forming between them, the first tentative steps of an unlikely love story. They talked for over an hour, until the afternoon sun slanted through the diner windows, casting a golden glow around them. For Scott, it was a revelation. This was real. This was the connection he had been searching for. For Alexandra, it was a moment of unexpected joy, a bright spot in her challenging life. But as they laughed at a shared joke, neither of them could have predicted the jarring interruption that was about to shatter their peaceful bubble. Just as Alexandra was pouring Scott another coffee, the diner's bell chimed, announcing a new arrival. The woman who strode in was the complete antithesis of the diner's cozy, humble atmosphere. She was dressed head to toe in designer clothes that cost more than Alexandra's annual salary, her face a mask of cold, bored arrogance. Her sharp eyes scanned the room with disdain before locking onto the one person she recognized Scott Wood, sitting in a cheap booth, dressed like a common laborer. This was Veronica, Scott's fiancée, a woman who was more of a business partner than a romantic one, their engagement a strategic merger of two powerful families. She marched over to the table, her heels clicking angrily on the linoleum floor. "Scott? What in God's name are you doing in this place?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. The surprise on her face was quickly replaced by a sneer as her eyes fell on Alexandra. "And who is this?" Veronica asked, not even bothering to look Alexandra in the eye, instead addressing the question to Scott as if the waitress wasn't even there. Before Scott could formulate a response, Veronica's gaze swept over Alexandra's simple uniform, her slightly worn-out shoes, and a cruel, dismissive smirk played on her lips. She saw not a person, but a stereotype, a nobody who was clearly beneath her. "Never mind," Veronica said with a flick of her wrist. "I can see what this is." She then turned her full, unimpeded scorn on Alexandra. "Let me guess, sweetheart. You saw a lonely man and thought you could play on his sympathies for a big tip. It's pathetic, really, what some people will do for a living." The words were like slaps, sharp and shocking, and they echoed in the Nausland diner. Every customer had stopped to watch the unfolding drama. Alexandra felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She was being publicly humiliated for her profession, for her very existence, by a woman who knew nothing about her. Veronica's words were designed to cut, to diminish, to put Alexandra in her place as a lowly service worker. It was a brutal and unprovoked attack, a display of power and class warfare in the middle of a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Scott was frozen for a second, shocked by Veronica's sudden appearance and the sheer cruelty of her attack. He saw the hurt flash in Alexandra's eyes, followed by something else, a flicker of steel. The warm, peaceful bubble he had been sharing with her had just been violently popped, and in its place was a cold, ugly confrontation. The two most important women in his life, representing two completely different worlds, were now face to face. And the fallout was bound to be catastrophic. In the face of Veronica's vicious onslaught, every instinct told Alexandra to either shrink away in shame or to lash out in anger. The air was thick with tension. You could almost hear the collective gasp of the other patrons. To be humiliated so publicly was a nightmare, a deliberate act of cruelty meant to strip her of her dignity. But Alexandra Romero was made of stronger stuff than Veronica could ever comprehend. The years of struggling had given her a backbone of pure steel. Instead of crying or shouting, she drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't much, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over the elegantly dressed woman. She looked Veronica directly in the eye, her own gaze calm and unwavering. "My profession," Alexandra said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent diner, "is serving people. It's an honest living, and I take pride in it. I don't know what kind of world you live in, but in mine, we don't measure a person's worth by the clothes they wear." It was a simple, powerful defense, delivered not with anger, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity. There was no apology, no weakness, just the simple, profound truth. She didn't insult Veronica back, she simply stood her ground, defending not just herself, but the value of her work and the decency of her life. It was an act of quiet rebellion, a refusal to be defined by someone else's prejudice. This was overcoming adversity in its purest form. Scott watched the entire exchange, and he was completely, utterly floored. He had seen powerful CEOs crumble under less pressure. Yet here was Alexandra, a struggling waitress, standing up to The formidable Veronica with a grace and strength that was nothing short of breathtaking. The contrast between the two women was suddenly painfully clear. Veronica, with all her wealth and power, seemed small and ugly, while Alexandra, in her simple uniform, radiated an inner nobility. This moment was a turning point for Scott. It wasn't just that he was impressed, he was profoundly moved. Alexandra's dignified response made him question everything about the life he had built and the company he kept. He looked at Veronica, truly saw her for the first time, and felt a deep sense of revulsion. The world she represented, the judgment, the cruelty, the obsession with status suddenly felt like a poison he had been slowly ingesting for years. As Veronica scoffed and stormed out of the diner, leaving a trail of stunned silence behind her, Scott knew something inside him had irrevocably shifted. His admiration for Alexandra had transformed into something deeper, something more urgent. He needed to know her, to be near her, to understand the source of her incredible strength. He had to find a way to get closer to her, outside the context of the diner and away from the toxic influences of his own world. After the dramatic exit of his fiancée, the atmosphere in the diner was thick with unspoken words. Scott apologized profusely to Alexandra, but she just gave him a small, weary smile and went back to work, her quiet dignity still very much intact. Scott knew that just saying sorry wasn't enough. He felt a desperate need to make things right, to show her that he was not like Veronica, that he belonged to a different world, her world, the world of genuine human decency. An idea, a slightly crazy but brilliant one, sparked in his mind. During their conversation, Alexandra had briefly mentioned that the faucet in her apartment was leaking and the landlord was dragging his feet on fixing it. It was a throwaway comment, a small detail of her struggling life, but for Scott, it was an opening. It was a chance to see her again, to spend time with her in her own environment, away from the prying eyes of his social circle. A few days later, he showed up at her apartment building, not in a fancy car, but in an old, beat-up pickup truck he'd bought for cash. He was dressed in the simple clothes of a handyman, a flannel shirt, work boots, and a tool belt. It was another layer to his secret identity, another plot twist in their burgeoning relationship. He knocked on her door, his heart pounding, hoping she wouldn't think he was a complete lunatic for showing up unannounced. When she opened the door, her surprise was evident. "The man from the diner," she said, a curious smile on her face. Scott, adopting the persona of a simple handyman, explained that he did odd jobs on the side and had overheard her talking about her leaky faucet. He told her he was in the neighborhood and could take a look at it for free. It was a flimsy pretext, but his earnest expression and gentle demeanor made it believable. Alexandra was hesitant at first. She wasn't used to people offering her help for nothing. Life had taught her that there was always a catch. But something about this candid stranger made her trust him. He had a good soul, she had felt it from their first meeting. So she let him in. She had no idea she was inviting a millionaire into her humble home, a man who owned buildings bigger than her entire apartment block. And so Scott Wood, the tycoon, found himself on his knees on a worn-out linoleum floor, peering under a rusty sink. It was a surreal experience for him, but it also felt more real than anything he had done in years. He wasn't closing a deal or managing his portfolio, he was fixing a leak for a woman who was quickly becoming the center of his universe. This was his way of getting closer, of proving his worth not with money, but with his own two hands. As Scott worked on the leaky faucet, the small apartment was filled with the sounds of clanking tools and easy conversation. The awkwardness of his surprise visit quickly melted away, replaced by a comfortable domestic intimacy. Alexandra made them both cups of tea, and as she sat at her small kitchen table, watching this kind stranger fix her plumbing, she found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with anyone before. They talked for hours, their conversation weaving from simple topics to the deeper currents of their lives. Scott, still pretending to be a simple handyman, spoke of feeling lost and disconnected, of searching for a purpose beyond just making a living. Alexandra, in turn, shared her own vulnerabilities, her fears for her family, and her secret, almost forgotten dream of opening a small bakery filled with the scent of fresh bread and pastries. It was a heart-aching exchange of souls. In that small sunlit kitchen, they were no longer a waitress and a stranger, they were just Alexandra and Scott. All the external labels millionaire, struggling worker were stripped away, leaving only the raw, authentic connection between two people. He saw the fierce intelligence and resilience behind her tired eyes, and she saw the profound kindness and loneliness behind his quiet facade. It was a powerful, emotional bonding experience, more real than any fancy dinner date. They worked together, side by side. She would hand him tools, and he would explain what he was doing, his voice patient and calm. There was a natural rhythm to their teamwork, a simple harmony that felt incredibly profound. In these small, shared moments, a deep and unspoken love story was beginning to write itself. They were two broken pieces of a puzzle who, against all odds, seemed to fit together perfectly. When the faucet was finally fixed, a sense of both triumph and melancholy filled the room. The excuse for him being there was gone. As he packed up his tools, there was an undeniable emotional charge between them, a silent acknowledgement that something significant had just happened. They weren't just a waitress and a handyman anymore. They were two souls who had seen and accepted each other's dreams and vulnerabilities. Scott left her apartment that day, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in his entire life. He was in love. It wasn't a calculated, strategic love like his engagement to Veronica. It was a deep, soul-stirring, unconditional love for Alexandra Romero. But this beautiful, fragile connection was built on a foundation of secrets, and as he walked away, a new fear began to creep in. What would happen when this all came crashing down? Life has a funny way of throwing a wrench in the works just when you think you've found a moment of peace. The day after Scott's visit, Alexandra went to work at the diner with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in a long time. The memory of their shared laughter and deep conversation was a warm glow in her chest. But that feeling of hope was about to be extinguished by a devastating piece of news. Her boss, a weary old man named Sal, gathered the small staff together. His face grim, he announced that he was selling the diner. He was getting too old, he said, and a developer had made him an offer he couldn't refuse. The place would be closing its doors for good at the end of the month. The words hit Alexandra like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. The diner wasn't just her job, it was her stability, her community, her second home. Suddenly, her already precarious world was on the verge of collapsing entirely. Being unemployed was not an option for her. She was the primary support for her ailing mother, and the thought of not being able to pay for rent or medicine sent a wave of sheer, cold panic through her. All her careful budgeting, all her double shifts, all her struggling it was all for nothing. She was back at square one, but this time it felt even more desperate. The news spread a pall of gloom over the entire diner. For Alexandra and her co-workers, this wasn't just the loss of a job, it was the end of an era. It was the loss of a place that, for all its flaws, was a constant in their lives. The shock and sadness were palpable. Alexandra tried to put on a brave face, comforting her tearful colleagues, but inside, she was screaming. How could she possibly handle another crisis? She felt utterly alone in her desperation. The brief happiness she had felt with the kind handyman, Scott, now seemed like a distant, impossible dream from another lifetime. How could she even think about a potential romance when her entire life was about to implode? The weight of her responsibilities came crashing back down on her, heavier than ever before. She was in a truly desperate situation, with no safety net to catch her. Later that day, she called Scott had his number now, under the pretense of, in case the faucet breaks again, and her voice was trembling as she told him the news. She didn't mean to unload on him, but the panic and fear just spilled out. The thought of losing her only source of income was terrifying, and she didn't know where else to turn. Little did she know, the man on the other end of the line had the power to solve her problem with a single phone call. On the other end of the phone, Scott would listen to the panic in Alexandra's voice, and every word was like a dagger in his heart. He could hear the raw fear, the desperation of a person whose lifeline was being cut, and it filled him with an overwhelming, primal need to protect her, to fix this for her. He was a millionaire, a man whose entire life was built on solving problems with money, and this was on the surface an incredibly easy problem to solve. He could buy the diner. He could buy the entire city block if he wanted to. He could write her a check so large she would never have to worry about money. Again, the solution was right there, at his fingertips, a simple transaction. He could end her struggling with a single signature. But his heart clenched at the thought, because he knew it wasn't that simple. Not at all. The man she knew was Scott, the kind handyman, a stranger who was perhaps as financially insecure as she was. Their entire connection, the beautiful, authentic thing they had built, was based on that shared reality. If he suddenly revealed himself as a secret millionaire, what would that do to her trust in him? Would she see his kindness not as genuine affection, but as the elaborate, cruel game of a bored rich man? He feared, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that revealing his true identity would destroy everything. She would feel deceived, manipulated, and possibly even humiliated all over again. The genuine emotional bond they had formed would be tainted by the vast, insurmountable chasm of his wealth. He would become just another person from Veronica's world, a world that Alexandra had already shown she wanted no part of. It was a terrible, impossible dilemma. So he stayed quiet on the phone, offering her words of comfort and support, telling her she was strong and that she would get through this. He played the part of the concerned friend, all the while his mind was racing, trying to find a way out of the labyrinth he had created. Every instinct screamed at him to help her, but his fear of losing her held him back. The secret that had started as a simple disguise was now a gilded cage of his own making. He felt the hand of destiny at play. It was as if the universe was forcing him to make a choice, to decide who he truly was and what he truly wanted. Could he risk their burgeoning love story for the sake of an easy solution? Or could he stand by and watch the woman he loved suffer, all to protect a lie? He was trapped between his power and his heart, and he knew that whatever he chose to do next would change both of their lives forever. While Scott was wrestling with his conscience, a storm of a different kind was brewing. His fiancée, Veronica, was not a woman who took public embarrassment lightly. After being dismissed with such quiet dignity by a mere waitress, her fury had been simmering. Driven by jealousy and a wounded ego, she had her own people do some digging. It didn't take them long to discover Scott's secret meetings with Alexandra, including his little charade as a handyman. Veronica saw this not as a love story, but as the ultimate betrayal. In her mind, Alexandra was nothing more than a cunning, gold-digging waitress who had sunk her claws into a millionaire. It was an affront to her social standing, a threat to the carefully constructed empire she was set to marry into. She refused to be cast aside for someone so utterly insignificant. Her mind, cold and calculating, immediately turned to revenge. She decided to pay Alexandra a visit, but this time not at the diner. She went to her apartment, catching Alexandra just as she was leaving for a job interview, her face etched with worry. Veronica's presence on her doorstep was a terrifying surprise. There was no pretense of civility this time. Veronica's eyes were like chips of ice as she laid out her threat, her voice low and menacing. "I know what you're doing," Veronica hissed, "and it's not going to work. Scott is mine, The life he lives is mine, and you are nothing. She proceeded to lay out a brutal ultimatum. She would use her family's immense power and influence to ruin Alexandra's life completely. She would make sure no one in the city would ever hire her. She would spread vicious rumors, turn her into a social pariah, and ensure that the gold-digging waitress would be thoroughly and utterly destroyed. She threatened to bring a world of pain down not just on Alexandra, but on her family as well. It was a cruel, calculated attack on Alexandra's most vulnerable points. The message was clear: stay away from Scott Wood, or I will burn your entire world to the ground. To be humiliated in the diner was one thing, to be threatened at her own front door was another level of terror entirely. Alexandra was left standing in her hallway, trembling, the vile words echoing in her ears. The threat felt very, very real. She had seen the power and arrogance Veronica wielded, and she had no doubt the woman could follow through. Suddenly, her problems weren't just about finding a new job. Her association with the kind handyman Scott had put her in the crosshairs of a very dangerous enemy. Her life, which was already falling apart, was now under a direct and malicious attack. The moment Veronica left, Alexandra's fear turned into a steely resolve. She was terrified, yes, but she was also furious. She would not be bullied. She immediately called Scott, her voice shaking but firm, and told him everything that had just happened about Veronica's visit, the threats, the whole ugly affair. She laid it all out, not as a plea for help, but as a statement of fact, a warning about the dangerous world he was unknowingly a part of. Hearing the story from Alexandra's perspective, Scott felt a wave of cold fury wash over him, followed by a profound sense of shame. This was his fault. His lies, his secret, his toxic engagement, it had all led to this, to the woman he loved being threatened and terrorized. The contrast between Veronica's vile cruelty and Alexandra's unwavering character had never been starker. It was a moment of absolute, undeniable clarity. He realized in that instant that Alexandra's character, her kindness, her dignity, her integrity was worth more than any fortune, any business deal, any social standing. It was the realest, most valuable thing he had ever encountered in his life. And he had put it in jeopardy by clinging to a world that was rotten to its core. The choice he had been struggling with was suddenly no choice at all. There was only one path forward. This was his moment of redemption. It was time to stop hiding, to stop lying, and to become the man that Alexandra deserved. He hung up the phone with her, promising he would handle it, and made another call. He summoned Veronica to his office, the cold, sterile boardroom that had once been his kingdom. When she arrived, smug and triumphant, she found a different man waiting for her. The lonely, conflicted Scott was gone, replaced by a man of absolute certainty. He didn't raise his voice. He simply and calmly ended their engagement. He told her he knew what she had done, and that her actions were not just unforgivable, they were pathetic. He made it clear that their businesslike relationship was over for good, and that any attempt to harm Alexandra Romero would be met with the full crushing force of his own power. For the first time, he was using his millionaire status not for gain, but for protection, for love. Veronica was stunned into silence, her threats turning to ash in her mouth. She had underestimated both Scott's feelings and Alexandra's influence. As he had her escorted from the building, Scott felt a profound sense of liberation. He had finally severed the ties to his toxic past. He had chosen authenticity over artifice, kindness over cruelty. Now there was only one thing left to do: tell Alexandra the truth and pray that their love story was strong enough to survive the biggest plot twist of all. The next morning, a day filled with nervous energy and sky-high stakes, Scott asked Alexandra to meet him at the diner. It was the last day before it was set to close for good. When she arrived, the place was empty, a sad, hollowed-out version of its former self. Sal, the owner, was there, along with a man in a suit holding a briefcase. Alexandra looked at Scott, who was standing there not in his handyman clothes, but in a simple, well-tailored shirt and slacks. The disguise was gone. "Alexandra," Scott began, his voice thick with emotion, "there's something I have to tell you. My name is Scott Wood." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. The name of one of the city's most prominent real estate moguls, a famous, almost mythical millionaire. Alexandra's eyes widened in shock, a storm of confusion and hurt clouding her face. The pieces were clicking into Placide's huge tip, Veronica's appearance, and it felt like a betrayal. Before she could speak, before the hurt could fully set in, Scott continued, his words tumbling out with sincerity. He explained everything: his lonely life, his search for something real, the secret test, and how he had fallen completely in love with her honest, beautiful soul. "Your kindness that first day," he said, his voice cracking. "It was the single greatest investment I have ever made in my entire life. It saved me from a world I didn't want to be in anymore." The man in the suit then stepped forward and opened the briefcase. He explained that Mr. Scott Wood had purchased the entire building. The diner was not closing. Sal was retiring comfortably, his future secure. Then, Scott took a set of keys from the lawyer and held them out to Alexandra. "It's yours," he said softly. "The diner, the whole thing. I know your dream is to have your own bakery. Well, maybe you can start here. This is not charity. This is a return on investment." It was the ultimate surprise, the most incredible plot twist she could have ever imagined. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of shock, relief, and dawning understanding. He hadn't been playing a game with her, he had been trying to find a way to her. He had seen her, the real her, and valued her above everything else. This wasn't just about money, it was about worth. It was about her kindness being seen as the most precious commodity of all. "I know this is a lot," Scott said, taking a tentative step closer, "and I know I have a lot to make up for. But I want to build a future with you, Alexandra. A real one, with no secrets." He stood there, the powerful millionaire, completely vulnerable, placing his entire heart in her hands. Their destiny had brought them to this point, from a simple act of kindness to this life-altering moment. The future of their improbable, heart-aching love story now rested entirely on her answer. And so, a story that began with a simple act of kindness in a lonely diner closes with two lives, two worlds, and two hearts becoming one. We've been on such an emotional journey with Alexandra and Scott, haven't we? We've seen the quiet battles of a struggling waitress and the gilded cage of a secret millionaire. We felt the sting of being humiliated and the triumph of overcoming it all. It's a powerful reminder that what you have in your bank account will never be as important as what you have in your heart. This entire love story really hinged on one choice, a choice to show compassion to a stranger. It's a testament to the idea that our character is the only thing we truly own, and that the biggest surprise, the most incredible plot twist, is discovering that your small act of kindness was the key to unlocking someone else's redemption and your own destiny. It shows that true value isn't something you can buy, it's something you must be. But now we want to hand the conversation over to you, our amazing community. What was the single moment in this story that touched your heart the most? Please share. What impacted you in the comments below? We truly want to know. And tell us, did you expect an ending like this? Or were you hoping for a different desfecho for Alexandra and Scott? We love reading your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please take a second to hit that like button. It helps our channel more than you know. And most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you follow our channel so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. We have a whole library of older stories just waiting to be discovered by you. Thank you for being here with us today. Stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.